here because you had a president choosing to take troops out of Syria over the advice of his commanders. You had Mattis quit over that. Then you had Brett McCurk, who's led that fight as special representative for the fight against ISIS for a number of years through two presidents. He also quit. What is the state, in your view, of U.S. national security decision-making under this president? Because clearly he went forward with his decision not only over the advice of his closest national security advisors, but apparently without informing many of them or also U.S. allies and partners in the field. Does the U.S. have a decision-making process today for key national security decisions?
Well, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, which tells you there's probably not a great process for getting these decisions done. And I think that's what so upset Mattis in this particular case. But we've seen this before. We've seen this movie before. If you remember, Trump was giving away things in the North Korean negotiations that many in the national security space said, please don't do this. You're giving up all your leverage. And Mattis had to get dispatched to Japan and say, calm down. We're just despite we're not doing joint training exercises, we're still with you. Well, that was a problem. And I know Mattis wasn't there. And certainly the national security, apparatus here was not supporting of those giving away without getting something kind of episodes. Pulling out of the INF was one that was not well discussed. And the INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces treaty with Russia, just kind of summarily pulling out of that created a whole bunch of problems that they were the national security folks were trying to put back together. Now you get to Syria and Afghanistan, where it's by all appearances, he just decided that morning he was going to tweet this thing out, hadn't talked to Mattis, hadn't talked to his security team, certainly hadn't engaged the envoy who was actually in negotiations with the Kurds at the time as they were doing a major military offensive that day. This is a problem. You can't pull away from your alliances and your allies in a way that creates this level of uncertainty because what it means is that they're going to stop trusting you eventually.
Yeah. Well, you've just listed a long list of alliances that President Trump has either pulled out of, the missile treaty, but alliances with allies on the ground in Syria, reducing the U.S. presence in Afghanistan, threatening the alliance with Japan. We know his public comments about NATO through the years. These are consequential things because alliances stand, don't they, based on the confidence that the U.S. will stand behind them. What are U.S. allies telling you? I'm sure you keep those relationships alive now about their own nervousness, including in Europe with Russia increasingly aggressive.
Yeah, and I do, and I talk to a lot of those folks, both in the military and defense and intelligence arenas, and certainly ambassadors and whatnot. Listen, they're very concerned, and they're going to put on the happy face as long as they can, but they express privately just this notion of, we don't know when we're going to get completely abandoned or thrown under the bus or fill in the blank. And these things take decades to develop, these relationships overseas. And, the reason that the Poles, that we have such a strength with the Polish government is because it's a counterbalance to Russia. The reason that we have such a strong relationship with Japan and South Korea, it's counters both China and North Korean activities in the region. And so you cannot and should not give your word and then just walk away from them. And that's certainly what happened with the Kurds in the most obvious way. We encourage them, we help train them, we help guide some of their decision making on the battlefield, and then somebody just hands them a note, says, good luck, we're out. That kind of thing has impacts not just in Syria, but the rest of Europe. And now they're wondering, and our Asian allies are starting to wonder, will we be there when things get a little hard? That's what, to me, is at risk. And that's what I hear most from all over the world, is we need to understand, is the United States really going to be there or not? And by the way, this is why this is so important, is that because we are there, because we have these alliances, we stop more problems than most people could possibly imagine by those relationships, by standing by our friends, allies, and allegiances. When you start to deteriorate that, Bad actors will fill the void. China's expansionism, certainly North Korea's bad activities, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians are all looking at this as huge opportunities, and it scares the rest of the world in a way I just haven't seen in a while.
No, it's great. I was going to ask you that question, saying if our allies are nervous, I imagine that our adversaries sense opportunity. But I want to ask you this then, that the president has enormous power in foreign policy and national security. That's the way our government is structured. But if there is no decision-making process, if he's not listening to his advisors, he's not running this through the traps, consulting allies, etc., and if he looks at alliances in a way that he feels he could pull out of them by tweet, I wonder what Congress can do. Is there anything that other parts of this government can do to check the president's worst impulses? Or do we have to sit back and say, well, throw your hands up in the air and just watch it unfold?
Yeah, no, I never believed that. Matter of fact, and I think you know this, I've been advocating for a congressional role in even the military actions we have around the country. And Congress, candidly, has abdicated their role ever since the passage of the first authorization to go into Afghanistan, and then they've used it kind of creative. The executive branch has used it creatively to do other actions, and Congress has let them do it. And shame on Congress for doing that. They can absolutely get back in. Now they have to have a logic, non-emotional, substantive debate, which sometimes is hard for them to do. But you need to start talking about what are our interests in making sure that Syria is stabilized and doesn't become a proxy state for Iran in the region that would destabilize the rest of it. You need to be able to have those conversations. Congress needs to get back in the game of authorizing military activity around the world. They should do it. Constitutionally, they're supposed to do it. And because it's a hard vote, they haven't wanted to take it for a very long time, but under both presidents, Obama and now Trump. And so I think if they get back into that business, they can have more influence about a rash decision to pull out or push back in. And that's one way. Power to the purse is the other one. You control the money that flows to these operations. You can cause some problems for the administration if you're not in sync, if you think it should get that far. And I never believe you should play politics with troops in the field, ever. And so you'd have to be careful that doesn't happen. But you can have an honest conversation about saying, hey, we're willing to fund this at this level, but maybe next year we're not. We're going to have to sit down and figure out what our strategy is moving forward.
Well, listen, right now Congress can't fund the government, so we'll see what progress they make on these other issues. Mike Rogers, thanks very much, and wish the best of you to your family for the holidays.
Thank you so much.
This government shutdown comes down to one thing.